All right, everyone. Hi, and welcome to Dumbing Down Data, when we're interviewing people from the tech industry to learn about how they broke into tech so that you all can feel empowered to do the same. My name is Carol, and I'm your host. And we have a very special episode. You can already see the smiles. With me are Robin and Greg. And there's a lot of history with how I know these two, but they basically went on the best journey of my life during my time at Decoded. We basically traveled to 4 countries and taught in a 3-week period a bunch of people in different departments from a very big Fortune 500 company, all about technologies like AI and blockchain, cybersecurity, and all of that stuff. These two people are so freaking awesome, but I'm going to move it over to the two of them to let them introduce themselves. So to get started, I want to ask each of you individually, maybe Robin, why don't we start with you? Who are you? What do you do in general? And how did you get into tech?
Hey, Carol. So, yeah, my name's Robin. Where did I start? So, what do I do? I mix a lot of skills. I started out as a designer. In fact, wanted to work in advertising, wanted to be an art director, came out of university. So, some 20 years ago, that job never materialized. At the time, I was taking on graphic design work, and what was really interesting, it was the early 2000s, and I was working with a lot of small independent businesses in London in the event industry, and they wanted to publicize themselves in print, in graphic design, but they also realized that they wanted a website. And in order for me to take on more work, the job in advertising never came to what I hoped it would be. I was taking on freelance work. So I decided I'd teach myself to code. I'd understood that like web developers, people at the time were self-taught. So I decided that I would learn how to put basic HTML websites together. And I've worked in digital ever since. I transitioned away from traditional design into web development. I'm a front-end developer. That means I work on the things that we all interact with. And every project I've worked on subsequently have had some form of digital presence. 10 years ago, I got in touch with Decoded. Decoded is the company that we all have worked for in the past, and that's how we met. And I did that because I realized that I was starting to spend all my time in front of a big screen. I wasn't interacting with people. I wasn't talking to people about technology. And I thought I'd give it a go. And 10 years later, I'm still doing it. I work with Greg in that space, where we help people demystify technology, break it down so that they can understand and have the confidence to explore technology in more detail. So I'm still a designer. I'm still a front-end developer. I'm an innovation coach. So I work with startups navigating the design and digital space, which is great. It's a culmination of many things that I've done, not just my own company, but also with Decoded. And with another mutual friend of ours, Alex, I was going to say a startup. It's a side project that we're looking to push into startup status. And it is a decentralized file storage platform exploring blockchain, Web3, those technologies. And that is the culmination of everything that I've done in the last 20 odd years. So that's not a short version of why I'm here.
No, that's a really good one. It opens up a lot of questions. Very short way of answering how much you've been doing in the last 20 or so years, which is a lot. And I think it's really amazing to almost showcase that in tech, it doesn't just have to be a one job thing. You can be creative and be doing a million other types of things, not just the actual technical part of it, like front end developing, but also coaching, also developing a startup, also speaking to people and teaching, which is so many different skills, like you kind of mentioned in the beginning, packed into one industry, which is super cool. And I'm going to get into a little bit more of that, or I have a few other questions that kind of popped in my head. All right, Greg, up next.
Cool. Okay. So, yeah, let's see. Because me and Robin, I've known Robin, it feels like a long time now, through Decoded. And yeah, I've been working a similar amount of time. We often teach together, me and Robin. We have slightly similar backgrounds. We both trained as designers. So for me, everything I do still stems from a design perspective. I work primarily as a graphic designer, but I'm also a web developer, also a creative technologist. I guess meaning I experiment with tech. But then more recently, education's become quite a big part of what I do. And that's kind of my whole other side of working with Decoded. But I also teach at university. So I teach at an art school in London called Kingston School of Art.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah, yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I've been doing that for a little while now. Teaching that 1 day a week. And it's quite interesting because I've for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been running a sort of specialist tech focus group on the BA graphic design course there. So bringing all these different worlds together, I think. But it's quite interesting how, for me, it like following a similar path to Robin in terms of being self-taught in the tech space. So, I studied at art school. I studied graphic design, which is, as a subject, is really tied to technology. It's a very new subject, and we were really encouraged to kind of make it our own. And for me, that was a chance to kind of bring two sides of what I do together, which was the art side and the science side, which like typically are always separated. And for me, I was always interested in both. And so I started to teach myself how to code and work with technology then. And then I did that in design studios after graduating, and then eventually setting up my own thing. And I was in a shared space, and I still am in a shared space at the moment, where I rent a studio space where I do my designing work. And I met someone there that really kind of helped me to further how I was working with tech. And he went off to found this technology education company, kept going off to do this teaching. That is what became Decoded. And then I first got involved because, having worked with one of the co-founders as a design and developer partnership, he knew that I knew a lot, I guess, about tech, how to work with it, I could understand it, and I was doing teaching. And then they kind of got me involved really early on with Decoded to do their first bits of, I guess, more formal graphic design. So I was designing booklets for them and thinking about how to design all of the kind of education materials. And because I taught, that then led into the teaching. And so, yeah, I've kind of got this triangle of teaching at the university, my design work, and then also Decoded that I do all at the same time.
So
there we go.
I love, one of the things I love about this podcast and doing it with people that I've known in the past is learning so much about them on the spot in a recording situation where now I have a million other questions. But I think that's really cool. And one of the things I do talk about in the podcast, which again, it just reiterates over and over again, is the fact that you can start by yourself and learn this on your own. So that's a very interesting thing. And it sounds like the two of you both have that background where you've taught this on your own. What I was curious about is, do you feel like you are a creative at heart? Is this, or is it more of, are you more of a technical person at heart? How does that mix together when it comes to technology? I guess, Robin, why don't you start?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something that I've kind of revisited in the last year, the idea of what is creativity and how does it work. I'm really interested, I guess, in the artist mindset, which is the ability to generate stuff. It can be, it can be something in 3D, it can be something in paint, it can be anything really. I guess, like this comes across as a little bit arrogant. Like, I've always known I'm creative. Like, I went and did an art foundation course after school. Like, I did art at A level, which is like where you 16, 17, 18. I did a foundation course. I went to university, studied graphic design. So I have never had a problem generating ideas. And the advertising stuff, ironically, is probably one of those big things in your life which doesn't work out. I didn't get the job I wanted, but I learned how to be creative. And I also learned how to take an idea and develop it and ditch it if I need to be, if I need to. So if it's a bad idea, I'm happy to generate it, work on it, and then ditch it, move on to the next one and on to the next one. When you cross-reference that with technology, it becomes really interesting, because when you start to explore code, and one of the things you have to do, I guess, if you're a self-taught developer, is learn the basics and then put it to practice. And for me, it was about being able to design an interface, a website, an app interface, and then go off and build it. I was bridging the two. So I wasn't designing something and handing it over to someone else to code. I was trying to generate that creative output and then translate that into code. For me, I think you can be both. I think you can be technical, and I think you can be creative, but there is always a balance. You have to, some of the ideas that I come up with, I can't at this stage work out how to get it built. Might mean I might need to go over to someone else. I might need to chat with Greg or someone else, one of our other close friends in a similar space. But I think the kind of the point you're making about anyone can get into technology at any point is, I find it fascinating, but I'm not if you look back, say from when I was 25 or younger, I wasn't really into tech and computers and things. I think Greg and I both have got a history of video game playing, which I think leads you in nicely into the industry now.
Yeah.
But a lot of what we do today and the way I work today is you play with code. I guess to Greg's point about being creative, experimenting, and that is a big part of trying something, seeing if it works, and then putting it into practice. And I think that's a really important aspect that we should be teaching everyone about technology. It's not necessarily the ones and zeros that people fear. It's actually about going in there and taking hold of code and playing with it, experimenting with it, and producing something at the end. So it can be a really creative process, but I think it's a hurdle you have to get over in your own head.
Do you think would you say there's a process to go to go into the creative part of it? Like, do you think you have to start by knowing the technical parts before you can jump into creativity when it comes to designing or coding or anything like that? Or how would that process go? Let's say, even for me, like if I was just starting out and I wanted to build something, do these listeners need to start with a process? Like, is there a learning process before you can go out and be creative, or can you do it together? Like, how does that sort of work? Greg, I guess you could.
Yeah, I mean, I really think it's a bit of both, because I think there's the process of knowing what's possible, and then there's kind of having the ideas to then almost like lead you in the direction to then figure that out. So it's kind of, the two really go hand in hand. I think, like in terms of my own background, I'm really always focused very much in the creative space. But I think there's a bit of a misnomer, the separation between technical and creativity, because I think a lot of the technical process is actually very creative in itself, because it's problem solving often trying to be as innovative as possible to kind of get the most elegant solution for something. And I think depending on what you're trying to do, there's the idea, which maybe relies on a bit of knowing what the possibilities are, knowing a bit about that world. I guess, having a bit of orientation, but then the idea can then lead into then needing to learn a little bit more about it. So they kind of go hand in hand. You sort of, you get a bit of knowledge, you then let your creativity or ideas lead you somewhere, and then you gain more knowledge. So I mean, whenever I'm teaching like students to work with creative code or that kind of thing, the approach I always use is to just learn enough technical stuff to solve the problem you want to solve as you go along, and you just build up from there. It's not about knowing everything in a particular space before you can then do anything. It's kind of build yourself as you go along, and just getting enough knowledge to solve the problem however you do it. It doesn't matter, as long as it works, then that's enough, and then you build from there.
I love that. That brings me to a book that I read about creativity. It's called The Laws of Creativity by Joey Cofone. I'm sure you both might know him.
Oh, yes.
Ariana. Yeah. Shout out to you. I love this book. I have to bring it to like everybody's attention, but it's so interesting about the process of creativity. And that's, I think, another misconception within the tech world is that it's just people in the computer screen looking at ones and zeros in the dark, and there's actually an incredible amount of creativity that comes into it because of just like you said, Greg, that problem solving piece, which is it's not linear. It's just all over the place. You learn a little bit, then you kind of try, then it doesn't work, then you get mad, you leave, and you take a meditation break, you come back, and then actually we were just talking about this before the recording, Robin. We're talking about how you kind of like go home and then the next day you come back and all the pieces come together. So it's really interesting that there is this misconception, I think, that coding and designing and tech in general is not necessarily a creative process, but there is a huge process to it. Was there anything else, Robin, that you maybe thought of in terms of creativity or how to add that or how that comes into play when you're doing when you're working on any of your projects in tech, even if it's outside of just the designing part too?
Yes, I think there's like certainly if I know I think we're going to get onto it, this idea of like how do you go about sort of taking that first step into sort of the digital space. For me,
Yeah.
it's always having something to work towards. So most of the time people have a need for a website, so and then it's up to them. Do they go and find someone who can do it for them, or do they actually learn it themselves? So having a project in your mind and thinking, right, how am I going to get this from what it is back of an envelope idea right through to actually I can access something on the screen. That's a great way. We meet lots of people who ask us, where should we go to learn to code? And there's some amazing courses out there. But the problem with courses is often you're following someone else's idea of what you should be building. Whereas actually a really good way of going, oh yeah, Greg's getting married, taking that as an example, if Greg didn't know how to code, just putting up a page online which has all the details of the day, that is a great way to start, because you not only learn what it is to get some content onto a web page, but you learn the process of needing some space, hosting, you need a domain, you need all of the stuff, the component parts that actually build up from your idea and putting it up on the screen. But I definitely think anyone who's interested in this space should be exploring, should always allow for time in their working week. It's not always easy. I'm finding that at the moment, where you experiment, you try things, you have a play. We're always talking when I'm working on projects about going off and having a play with some code, because often you're going to have to find a solution to a problem. Greg's highlighted that idea that go and find the solution. Sometimes that solution is going to work and it's going to be great. Like I found with a piece of code that I wrote recently, the library that we used is now depreciated. So that means it's no longer supported. So we've got to go off and find a new version of that library, which is on paper can feel a little bit annoying, because you're like, oh, I've got the solution, it works, it's great. But actually now we've got to go and find the next solution to that problem. And that part of it, tackling it in a way where you can be quite pragmatic. You know you've got a problem that needs to be solved. You might not solve it first time round, but there is always a solution out there. And I think if you start that process and you've got some friends or work colleagues or people who can give you a little nudge in either direction when you need it, it can be really helpful. But you've got to almost be self-initiated. A big part of all the people we've worked with, I suppose, at Decoded and beyond, majority of those people who code are self-taught. And if you can learn to self-teach the elements of whatever it is you want to learn, then that stands you in very good stead. There aren't any resources. I don't know, Greg, you might disagree with this, but very few times will I was going to say, very few times will I ping Greg to solve a problem I've got. But the irony is, just before this call, I pinged him about a problem I was having, just because I got to that stage where I was like, Greg might know the answer to this. Yeah. But most of the time it comes down to you to have the sort of almost the tenacity to go and find the answers. So there's going to be a little bit of sort of stubbornness in going, right, I'm going to tackle this, I'm going to get it right. A little bit of creativity, but also just the ability to go, okay, today wasn't the most successful day, but tomorrow I'll crack it, and you'll find that you move forward really quickly in this space.
So yeah, just to quickly add to that, it makes me think that role of play is just massively important, to make space for it and make time for it. And like over the years, I've worked with really creative people in all sorts of different spaces and really technical people. And anyone that works with technology, the one thing they have in common is they're constantly tinkering and like trying out new ideas, working on little things on the side. And it's kind of where you're problem solving almost in a space where there's no consequences. You're not trying to do it for a deadline or a particular job, and you're figuring out how things work. And so I think an element of curiosity is really useful. And I think to kind of get into it can be challenging if you don't know what that landscape looks like. So that was, what we were just saying earlier about, starting with the technical or the creative part. But once you've got a bit of understanding, it's really important to kind of play with things. And we've constantly, within our group of friends, people are constantly just sharing little ideas or little things they've built and saying, what do you think of this? And, getting feedback. And I think that's just really important, because then you start to learn new things, and then it will constantly then come up when you're trying to solve a problem down the line. You think, oh, that thing I was trying the other month, I'll dig that out because that would solve a really similar thing. So I think, making the time to kind of just explore and play and be curious is really important.
So good. Such good points. And it goes still back to that element of creativity where first of all, I really love the idea. Think of something that you want to initiate, maybe something you want to build, to go off of that and learn. It almost makes me think a lot about, let's say, this podcast and how it was the way I started learning about building a business and all of the concepts involved in marketing and, bringing people together and being organized and all that stuff. Like, you just learn this as you go. There's not a perfect formula. I used to think that it was like, you have to learn everything academically and then all of a sudden you're like the world's best coder or something, but it's really all about constantly iterating in this really jagged landscape that never is linear and is always rough in the edges. But also thinking, like you said, Greg, kind of mentioning having people around you also that are doing the same things, who want to help you, who want to give you feedback, who want to help you improve. Those things are also really helpful, but also being a seeker of resources. So being the one that can take the initiative to go in and look for the answers that you're looking for, knowing in advance that you're going to find problems. You're going to run into those problems, and we have to find ways to fix them. Like you said, you use the word tenacity. I think that's a really good word for people in technology. Tenacious, ambitious, creative, problem solvers. So those were all really, really good points. Does anyone want to add anything else before I move on to another question that I had as we were talking about this?
I just reiterate Greg's point about curiosity. It's a good, it reminded me of someone, in one of the courses we deliver, talks about being curious around tech. I think you have to have curiosity. I think you also got to almost step over that fear of what it is. I know we've met lots and lots of people who simply fear technology, and understanding the basics. So a little bit of going back and kind of understanding what it is that you're interacting with behind the screen, I think is really helpful. But just being curious, like the problem you've got with learning all of this is, as you say, you don't know, like, I don't know any developer who knows everything about all the code, all the programming languages out there. You learn as you go. I think that's something that we should be teaching our kids. I think it's really important that you don't necessarily have to have all of the knowledge before you start. But the problem you get is every time you do something and you succeed, you open up a new door and there's new stuff to learn. So a big part of me learning to code came from the fact that I thought I'd come out of university and learn everything I needed and I could apply it to a job. And the irony was I didn't get the job I wanted, but then I realized I was missing the learning aspects of school and college and art college and university. And the irony of all of that is that code, you can delve into all areas. So Greg and I will have different passions within the coding industry. So there'll be elements that he'll be excited about, and there'll be elements that I'll be excited about, and they'll be very different, but they're all underpinned by the fact that code is there. So you have to have that curiosity. You have to have that mentality that, it's not always going to be easy, but it's so sweet when you get to that point and you've created something and you've put everything in place to get it up and running. And then it's the case of turning it into a prototype or a business or something that a client might come in and buy. But you've almost got to accept that there's going to be, as you say, like the road bumps, and it's not an organic journey either. You kind of move left and right, and you never quite know where you are. But suddenly you'll get to a point where you'll have all of this knowledge and you'll be able to do things without necessarily thinking about it. So you'll be able to program in a certain language and it'll become fluent, like learning, French or Spanish.
Just one more thing to add to that as well is that approach of being tenacious or being creative or whatever. Like, you might be thinking, oh, well, that's maybe not how I work. I'm not one of those things, but that's something you can build over time. And I think that's kind of the approach you get to, but it's all about almost starting somewhere and doing one step at a time, and then forming habits that enable you to do that. So you kind of get to that place where you are someone that hacks and pulls things apart and has that curiosity. But if you don't know really where to start, it's just about, you know, beginning by doing one little test, one little experiment, starting one project. So yeah, Robin's example of giving yourself something to work towards, and that's kind of where you get to. But it's, you know, like there are different approaches, and so all sorts of people in different they have different characteristics, can work with technology, and it's just about starting, and then before you know it, you're doing one little thing each day, one little thing each week, and then you start to build a habit, and then you can work with it.
I love that. This is like it's almost like life lessons through technology, because it's making me think of all of like how life works in general, like building towards something. I think is really cool, again, kind of in life and in tech, but you're building, but coming into it knowing that it's going to be hard, it's not going to be easy, you're going to run into problems, but then you're going to look back and you're going to see the results. And it's not that you're going to see a result and then it's the end and you're done, but you're going to see something that then you're going to be curious and want to build towards even more. But being able to get through that bump, like I think that's when people quit really quickly, is when we run into a bump and then we're like, this is too annoying, this is too hard, it's overwhelming, I just want to do the same thing I always was doing because it's easier. But if we can pass through that threshold and, like we've been saying, leverage the curiosity, like, okay, maybe it's hard, but I really want to figure this bug out, or I really want to figure this out. Once you do, you then see what you built or what you were able to solve or what you were able to learn, and it becomes really exciting. And I think, Greg, you said another word that also, life lessons, habits. It's so important to build the habit of actually continuously showing up, even if it's not the time or the day that you want to show up for, just showing up for it anyways, even if it's a 5-minute situation, to then continuously get through that uncomfortability, I think, until you're able to get into the groove of it and actually build on to what you're doing. That kind of makes a little bit of sense, but it's
I'd like, just to give you an example, the first holding page I put online, I think it was for me, it was a really small, I think it was just an image in an HTML page. It took me 2 days to do it. The first day I just couldn't connect my index.html, my homepage, with the server. I couldn't get it online. I knew nothing. And the next day I came back and I spent a load more time when I probably should have been doing client work. But it was when I got it live, that feeling was what you get when you work with code, is you just got this kind of light bulb moment, which is, right, I get it now. I understand what I've learned. It's taken me 2 days. It's not going to be a particularly viable business opportunity if it's going to take me 2 days just to push one page online. But it was that process of working out each and every step, working out what I was doing wrong, fixing it, going again. And that probably is the starting point when you get that little dopamine hit when something works, when you use code. You do with I'm sure with every job, but there's something that becomes intrinsic with the way you work, which is you try something, you have that experimental aspect, you give it a go, and when it does work, you've learned so much. Next time you do it, you can do it really quickly, and you can very quickly in itself build up that knowledge base. And if you keep doing it, like Greg highlighted, that habit part, and it is like exercise, it's like a muscle, you can keep that going, you can learn, you can move really quickly. We all find we struggle when we take sort of 2, 3, 4 weeks off from a particular area of code, and then we've got to go back to it, you've got to refresh, but that's part of that process as well. So I think it's really just comes down to, I've got to get this next step done. How am I going to do that? Once you get it over that hurdle, then it's just, you start the next process and the next process, and before you know it, you've made big steps forward in this space.
Yeah. One other thing to add as well is that just got me thinking there, Robin, about that approach of returning to something and reapproaching fresh, like the next day or the next or later that day or whatever it might be. And this applies really to creativity as well as any sort of problem solving, is allowing your subconscious to kind of process things, which it will naturally do all the time anyway. So I'll always throughout the day go out for walks or just have breaks, and then the amount of times I can't solve something, I'm pulling my hair out trying to fix a problem or get some kind of a solution, or go off have a coffee or go for a walk or whatever it might be, you come back, sit down, and then suddenly it looks completely fresh and new. So I think
have a little rest, Greg. Yeah, just you take it easy.
talking about my working
He takes
habits
it
now,
easy.
yeah.
It's
It's a
If I have
mutual.
a sofa in my studio, have a little lie down. Right?
Well, it's funny because Alex I work with on the side project that we're kind of moving forward with, it talks very much about, I mean, he'll take time out in his day to think through the process, and he's a back-end developer, so very technical, probably by his own admission would not necessarily look at the sort of the design side. But he said to me the other day, he's like, I'm going to need to have a think about this, because his process is to think through the technical requirements. So back end is interacting with servers, very complicated for a front end developer. That's the next level. But he was applying an approach that an artist might do if they're coming, working on a painting. So I find it interesting that he'll take time and make sure that is available in his working day, just as much as I might, or a sculptor, painter, etc. And that's the creativity coming through, is the need to see things with fresh eyes. And it just so happens it might even be a little bit easier with tech, because code is right or wrong. It will either work or it won't. So there's an element of maths and science in there where you've got to make sure it works. And once it works, it works. Whereas, if you're articulating copy or, writing an essay or anything, it might be that you sort of have to finesse it. With code, if you can get it right, then you're winning. But it's just an interesting side, that creativity and technology aspect. I think everyone who works with technology in some way is experiencing the world of creativity. They just might not necessarily call it that.
I love that, the art of back-end engineering. I like it. But I do think there's a bit of a misnomer that like developers will just sit down and immediately start coding and making the thing, and that's what the job is, just making it. But it's actually a huge amount of it is thinking, problem solving, and so I think anyone that doesn't come or is trying to move into a technical space but is able to break problems down and solve them, that's like half the battle, really. If you can do that, you can. It's then just about understanding that space and trying to apply it.
I love this. This is just making me so happy hearing this. It's amazing. Because actually, funny enough, that was literally my next question, Greg. So you answered the question I was going to ask, which is, what do you do when you run into the roadblocks? And you guys are just so ahead of me right now, which is great. But it makes me think a lot about, at least working in the corporate environment of the tech space. We are very ambitious people. We tend to run through a lot. We want to do a lot in the short amount of time that we have. And taking breaks and doing things that help your brain feed before actually continuing the output is so important. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Greg, even though, you take it easy while we all do the work, it's fine. But I do think it's important to bring it up, because that's another misconception that we have. It almost like, the pictures of these coders are like literally like in a dark box, typing away, focus, but we need time for breathing and to do other things and to take breaks before coming back to solve problems. And it can be intertwined between whether you're doing a creative task that isn't right or wrong, or a very literal coding task that is a yes or a no answer. The two of them are still creative tasks. They still require the brain to then breathe. So you kind of answered the question, but Robin, if you have any additional things of what do you do when you run into a roadblock? What kinds of things do you do?
So for me, kind of alluding to what Greg says, there's a part of the process which is breaking down something into its component parts. So and that idea came when I started to explore like how do computers work, and going back and quite into that, like the history of why we've got these amazingly designed machines on our desk. But actually what you're doing when you're programming is it's a set of steps, and you've just got to work out a bit like Greg mentioned the phrase hacking. It's when you hack something, you're sort of breaking it apart and rebuilding it. And that process, when you have a job, you're working on a project, and you've got to break it down into its component parts and then work out which are the bits that you need to do first. And you ultimately, part of the process of experience is you work out, I know the things I've got to do first before I do, you've got to do job A before job B, because if you do it the other way around, then you're going to become, you're going to get yourself into a sort of a little bit of a mess. But I know that, like, part of the work I do is I suppose you work with clients, you help them understand that process as well. So you've got to kind of give a sort of breakdown of how you're going to approach, the next task on the list or whatever it is. But I know I'm working with a client at the moment who have got a pinpoint where data gets transferred from a website to their content relationship managers, a CRM, so where they can store the potential customers, and where they can store email addresses to market their products and services. And the conversation kind of revolved around that idea that we've got to take each step, take the piece of data, whatever it is, an email address, and work out, plot where it's going to be at each and every stage. And it can feel a little bit basic, but it helps you to understand and see. For me, it's about seeing the bigger picture when it comes to technology. So some people will map out a whole website and they'll want to see it, because then they use that as a way to guide the work that they're going to do. But when you hit roadblocks, I mean, accepting the fact that you've hit a roadblock, stepping away is great. I'm still amazed at the world of fresh eyes. Like, if you go, you just give up. I know people who just walk away. They'll just go, they'll give up, and step away for the day, if it's the end of the day, and they'll come back in the morning, and the likelihood is you'll be able to fix it. And so many times when I started to take on website projects for clients, and I was quite fearful of not being able to do the work in time, so I hit a blocker. But actually, knowing when to step away is a skill in itself. It's safe to say probably developing now is that we're in a much better place than we were 10 years ago, or even 15, 20 years ago, when browsers used to really misbehave. They're really tricky to kind of understand the nuances, and so we're in a much better place, and the resources are out there. There's so many websites that you can go to, and you can see people have documented. Developers are really good at going, well, I found a problem, I'm going to tell everyone how I fixed it, and then other developers will chip in. So Stack Overflow is a really good one, where people post questions and then everyone comes back. And the likelihood is that if you're in that position where you're learning, someone else has had that problem in the past and have already posted a question where the answers are there. So you almost hone those skills about where to go and find potential solutions to problems that you're having, and also understanding what the problem is. And experience kind of begins to help you there, because every time you do a project, you learn a little bit more about the kind of the whole ecosystem. So you might learn how servers work. You might not really ever want to, but you might hit a problem that then gives you a little bit more for the next project, where you go, oh, I knew I had that problem before, I'm going to get everything in order before I upload the website, for example. So I think it's just accepting it's going to happen, and knowing that you will get there, but it might not necessarily be today, it might be tomorrow, or tomorrow afternoon maybe. So it's just having the acceptance that process is going to be a bit of a stumbling block, and no developer I've ever met knows it all. And I think there's a bit of that misconception is definitely worth repeating, is that people think that everyone's got it in their head. And it's like, I don't know about you, Greg, but there's stuff I still look up which I should know, but I just never have come across it. So that's the approach I take.
Yeah, I think just to build a little bit on that, this I think looking at the problem in different ways is also really helpful. So what I tend to do a lot of the time is actually I draw the problem, and that's partly just, it depends on the nature of what it is you're trying to solve, but I'll often try and almost like break that problem down. And when you're drawing, really, you're kind of noting down your current understanding of it, or you're translating it in a different medium or in a different way. And I mean, I do a lot of sort of creative code, so that's kind of really relevant in that space. But actually, I think just translating something, or like explaining your problem to someone, is another sort of equivalent way of doing that as well. So I think sometimes the idea of just talking through your problem is really valuable, because as soon as you start to explain it, sometimes you'll find where that gap is. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do when I draw, is I'm just trying to visually understand the situation or relationship between things. So I think, and it kind of comes into teaching as well, because a lot of what you're doing with teaching is trying to organize your thoughts to explain it to someone else, which means you're kind of trying to look at what's relevant or what's important in a particular situation. So I think communication is a really useful way to do it. So rather than suffering by yourself with a problem and being stuck, actually finding someone to talk it through or to ask about or explain what you're doing with someone is a really useful way to kind of help get around it as well.
This is like the life lessons with Robin and Greg, I think, is where it's turning to, which is amazing. But definitely, I mean, Robin, you also, by the way, mentioned something again that really was exactly what I was going to voice, but the importance of recognizing that we think everybody has it figured out when someone's maybe a few years ahead of you, but really we're all still trying to figure something else out. Like some probably an experienced developer, designer, anyone in tech, an experienced person is still trying to solve a problem as if they are new to that problem. Whereas you're just trying to solve a very beginner problem if you're just starting, that they've all been there before as well. So I think that was so important. And then Greg, I loved the other additional things that you talked about, which is trying to look at the problem from different angles, which I think sometimes we have a tendency of being so focused on the problem and we just try to continue to fix it just by doing the same thing. But there's so much meaning to taking a break or to asking somebody or talking to somebody, drawing it out, writing it out, bullet points, speaking it out, walking it out, these other types of things that might actually generate some level of creativity. I really learned this in my own work because I have this like need to figure things out, not realizing that kind of what you said with deadlines, Robin, where it's almost like a pressure, like, no, but I have to figure it out. But it's such a skill to learn that you just don't have to figure it out sometimes. Like it actually will benefit you not to. So those are all just like amazing things that you've touched on. And I think that everything that we just talked about doesn't just have to be, siloed to a coder, developer, designer, but any type of job in general, in tech or outside of tech or just in life. It's all just really good things to remember, at least hopefully when you're all doing your own work and trying to figure those things out that are just into the acceptance parts. I like the idea of just accepting it is also really, really helpful. So I'm gonna think I wanted to ask another question that's a little bit outside of this, but it's still interrelated. We're talking about some pain points. We've been talking a lot about the issues and how to solve them, but what is like your favorite part of what you do in tech? If maybe let's go with Greg this time. Let's turn it around and we'll start with Greg and see what's been like your favorite part in all of this time, or even like your favorite memory or something that really boosts that dopamine, kind of like Robin was saying, the dopamine boosters that you get from working in the tech world.
Greg, is it you just sitting on the sofa?
Yeah,
the
walk.
It's just dreaming. Yeah, it's all. And that's a hard question because there's all different aspects, but I think when you're trying to do something and then actually it ends up working, you kind of crack that problem. Like the thing does what you're trying to get it to do, and then suddenly it starts working or moving or whatever. Like you just can't really. I think it's almost the satisfaction of breaking through a problem. You can't really beat that. I think that's for me is where it becomes kind of magical. I think because it was, I guess that's kind of what got me into it. Like coming from a gaming background, as Robin mentioned at the beginning, like the moments. Or I don't know. I'm really into movies. I'm really into like things where we kind of have like dramatic moments where you get revealed or things like that. And that for me, the tech space is when you can make something happen. There's like an interaction, and you've been trying to get it to work, and then suddenly it happens, and you've been getting it wrong all day or all week or whatever it might be. I think that for me is where it kind of all becomes worthwhile because you've written some lines of code, and then they've made this thing happen. And it starts to bring it to life, and I think that's kind of what keeps me plugging away in that space. I think it's just the kind of things that you figure out. You can kind of create these little, I guess, I don't know, like delightful moments or little moments of surprise or whatever. So yeah, for me, so maybe it's related to my sleeping on the sofa, as you know. You kind of reapproach it, get it to work, and then yeah. So I
It's
don't know if that answers it. Yeah, getting through the problem, making it happen, making it work. Because as you know, when it all connects, that's the moment it feels worthwhile.
It's kind of like those that in the movies when there's like that aha moment, like the da and like the angels
Yeah.
shine and everything. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we've alluded to that a lot this during this conversation. So it sounds like breaking that barrier is like just a magical moment. Like you said, the word magic. I really like that. What about you, Robin?
So for me, like I think originally I talked about like when I started at Decoded. So what we do at Decoded, we stand up. Well, we do it in person, we do it virtually at the moment. Stand up and you help people understand technology. And I remember getting a real kick out of helping people
Mm,
understand a little bit more about technology, realizing that they probably knew more than they were giving themselves credit for, and
mm,
having really good conversations. And the people I've either worked with or who have been attendees in sessions, that's one of the things you get. You come back and you go, you see it from a different light because you know how you approach it, but then helping someone else to go, oh, okay, I know more about my job than I thought I did. But then also marrying up the two. So one of the reasons I started the work and the side project is literally spent a lot of my career talking about technology, and now it's all about building something that builds on those conversations and the knowledge I have in certain different areas, like the blockchain space, and bringing in some of the security elements that I find fascinating. So it's now about actually using that skill. I'm working on that project at the moment. I'm learning how to build, well, this is an app interface in a different way than I've done before. And the satisfaction is kind of, Greg kind of highlighted, the satisfaction you get when you get over the sort of certain hurdles that are in front of you. And you've got something that's working that people like and they're getting excited about and they want to talk to you about and they want to build on top of. And suddenly you've got this process where you're getting that, you're actually doing what you set out to do when you tell people about technology and why it should be a force for good and the positive aspects of it. You're actually beginning to put those products and services in people's hands and they're getting something from it. And it's just now that it's that tying up of all of the elements. Like Greg and I have done a lot of work in the innovation space, helping people understand innovation and methodologies, and now actually using that yourself and going, yeah, they do work. So when you tell someone, you're not telling them just because that's what you're supposed to do. You're going, I've used this and it's really worked for me and it might work for you. But helping them by navigating the fact that they don't necessarily, it might not work for them, and giving them the sort of the opportunity to explore it themselves, but also to realize there are other ways of doing things. So you can have an authentic conversation with someone because you have gone through that process. And for me at the moment, that was a big aspect. I started, well, I'm 43 now. I turned 40 just before the pandemic. That was a big aspect of me moving into the second half of my career, is trying to understand, okay, what do I want to get out of all of this?
mm.
Because you have a finite amount of time. And it's a case of also trying to highlight what are the areas you really enjoy and trying to bring that into your day-to-day work. So you go, well, I'm happy to say HTML emailers do my head in, and it's not an area that I'd ever want to do ever again. So it's going, well, I know that I can do them if I have to, if needs must. But what I really like to do is the kind of the creative side. So you begin, I think, once you've got that confidence, you begin to start to think, okay, what is it I want to do? If I can choose, if I'm lucky enough to choose. And I think that's a big part of what people, if they're exploring this, is trying to find a passion within tech.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know lots of people are really interested in data and machine learning. So they go off and they explore that side because they've already got the interest. And I think that comes down to not just having a project to work on, but also trying to find, what are you interested in? And I remember for me, it's when we were Decoded, or when we were talking about some of the slightly more open-ended courses, it's all around future technology and what are we going to be doing tomorrow or in 5 years or 10 years time. I'm really interested in that space. And then that led me kind of via the garden path to do things within the Internet of Things, connected devices. You learn a different way of coding with devices. And then that led me ultimately to blockchain space. And that you can see the organic journey I've taken to get to where I am now. But that's come from trying to find the things that I really like to talk about. And lots of people have lots of different thoughts on that as well. So it's very rare for all of us to think that we concentrate on one area. Like Greg's, if you get Greg onto a topic, it'll be different to the one that I'll want to talk about. And that's the beauty of it, is it's a companion to your knowledge around code, is kind of that passion within that space.
It's interesting. I'm thinking about this as we talk about it and how different, I mean, Robin and Greg a little bit closer together in terms of what they do versus what I do. But, it's interesting because when I first got into tech at Decoded, I literally was learning how to teach code without knowing how to code. And like, that's where I was. And I was learning through my own abilities to teach how to do that, and it didn't have anything to do with the technical knowledge. And then I went on to think that I needed to learn, let's say, coding language. So I was deeply trying to learn Python, but I couldn't fully do it because I just wasn't totally interested in it. And I thought in my head that really early on in my career that I have to know how to, let's say, code a full stack, like a full stack developer or something, in order to say I was in tech. But as I progressed in my career, I learned that, like you said, Robin, it's really about building off of what you like to do within the industry. And here I am sitting in front of two people who have dealt with code and who do a lot of this on their own time. And I'm still able to have these conversations with them, and we're able to connect dots of different areas with my passion, which is bringing it to other people who may not be in technology yet. And so it's really interesting what you said, because I do think it's, I bought a bunch of books about like learn data, learn code, and I like haven't touched them because I just don't want to learn how to actually tactically do it. I know the basics just so I understand like what it is that I'm talking about, and I can kind of build off of it. But I've never built a website, or I kind of have a little bit now, but never really built like a full website or done anything on that level. But I can still have really good conversations, and I can still educate on data and blockchain and AI and cybersecurity, and bring it to clients as well in my own company now. So just like you said, figuring out what that thing is that interests you within technology is a really important part, because once you can start talking about it, you can do it in any kind of area that you choose to do, and you could bring your creativity to it. So I think that was a really, really good point. Kind of expanded upon what my whole reason for doing this podcast is, because I thought I needed to know tech in terms of a very literal coding style, but that doesn't have to be the case. Greg, do you have anything else to add, or?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because I didn't really touch on the teaching part of what I do at all with that area. And listening to Robin speak, it really makes me think that when you help someone to connect the dots, or make those, or enable them to navigate something, and you see that it really has impact, it's quite gratifying to kind of help to kind of form those relationships. And I think that is a big thing with tech, is just everyone. And actually, this is something that when we were kind of traveling to all those different locations, it's something that was really apparent, is everyone the world over is kind of trying to tackle or trying to navigate the same landscape, because it is affecting all of us in terms of technology, and it can be slightly bewildering, slightly disconcerting, and until you kind of unlock that way into it and start to figure out the terminology or break things down or whatever it might be. And so I think being part of building those conversations or enabling people to sort of navigate. And so also just thinking about what you were saying, Carol, about, it's not about, okay, I just need to learn one particular programming language and get that really deeply. Sometimes it's enough to, I guess, break through some jargon, some terminology, understand how different areas relate. And it means that right away you can start to then speak with people, and all of you kind of navigate the same problem at the same time. So yeah, I think the teaching part is I think the kind of connections you can form through it, or help people to form, is really valuable as well.
Yeah, the teaching part was something that I think is really amazing about the two of you, is outside of being on the actual technical part of it, is bringing it to other people. And the two of you, I mean, I've seen it in many different settings, are very, very good at bringing that energy to people and actually making them feel welcome to learn. And for context, we traveled to many different countries, and so we saw different types of cultures. And even so, you were still able to bring the environment of learning and opening up the discussions of technology to people and empowering them, which is a very important additional side that I think makes you both very magical. And it was really cool to see these two people kind of be able to convey information in that way, and share some laughs along the way for sure. So I was going to ask a final question. So we talked a lot, I mean, kind of maybe to sum up, I guess, but let's say there's somebody here listening that is literally at ground zero. They have heard about tech, they're interested in the industry, but they have no idea where to start. Do you have any suggestions on what might be like their very first step? I mean, we talked about a few things, but what might be like a tactical thing that they could think about doing today or tomorrow? Maybe, no, not tomorrow, today. Do it today. What's a tactical thing that they can start now doing to build on to be able to then get into this industry, break into this industry in whatever way might suit them?
I'm happy to start off. Great.
Good question.
But for me, it's trying to find the thing that you're passionate about. Like, trying to like take it out of technology. Like a lot of people, they play sport, they like the sports that they play. So it is tapping into kind of what it is that you like about technology. It's a really interesting space, like to work. You know, you get hopefully get paid well to work in an industry that's kind of fast moving. But you've got to try and identify the element of what it is that keeps you, like, what are you looking at on social media? What are you looking at on news sites? What are you reading about? And for me, like it took still taking me a fair few years to kind of really hone down. Like, I know that in my head, I'm not particularly excited as much about AI as other people are. And there are other technologies out there that excite me more. I understand its role. It's massive at the moment. ChatGPT is huge. I've got to do some work in that space. I've got to get my head around it. But if I get to sit on a plane or a train or just, you know, maybe at home, if I get an hour to myself and like read through Wired, or like I'll pick out articles that probably won't be picking up on the latest trends of AI in medicine. It just is not necessarily where I find myself. And that I think I think it's perfectly fine to find the areas you're really interested in and go off and explore them. It's a little bit like trying to find out what do you want to do with yourself when you're, you know, when you've got to get a job and a career. You've almost got to listen to those signals, kind of what it is you get a kick out of, or where's your passion lie. And then it's a case of going exploring it in more detail. Like for me, if you're questioning like whether you should get started in the space, then go and do as basic a learning course as you can online. Just get the basics of how to get something up online. A website is a really good starting point. Have a think, you know, everyone knows a friend who needs a website. And it's a really good starting point, because if you don't like code, it will become very apparent when you do that you won't find that you sort of every day you get up and go, right, I've got to write another 100 lines or 1,000 lines of code. But you might find there's an element of that process that you get really interested in. You might find that you really love the design side. You know, you like how it looks and feels, but you're not interested in how you put that together with code. You might just go, well, I'll design it and get someone else to build it. But I think for me, it's about trying to find what it is you want. You might have to just go through and try lots of different things. I've learned, or I've tried to learn many programming languages, which I just don't use anymore because they didn't resonate with me. I found other things that I was like, I want to spend my time doing that. And I think that part of it, that process, is kind of keep an open mind, be curious, explore, but also at some point work out if you don't like doing something, then don't spend that time. There's so many avenues and disciplines that you can explore, so many programming languages, so many different things in tech now. You don't have to be you don't have to know it all, like end to end. You can just go, oh, I'm going to specialize. And there are lots of people out there who specialize in specific areas of tech. I think LinkedIn's probably quite a good place to go and find people talking about it. Just be wary about people talking about stuff that potentially maybe they're lifting from other people, you know, they might not be the expert, although they tried to be the expert. Try and find a way of filtering out some of the information out there. So you really, you know, you're listening to the people who are doing it and can help you on a day-to-day basis. And I think just go with it. That open mind, I think, is really essential, because you will get there, but you've just got to work out what it is you want to do. And then I think it's just bring it back to your day-to-day. So you'll find tech everywhere. Everyone's got a well, most people lucky enough to have a smartphone. You'll find things on there where you go, oh, I wonder how that's built. And then you'll go off and explore it. And you go, oh, I could do that. And then suddenly, before you know it, you're building an app and with your mate, and you're releasing it to hundreds of people. So a little bit of a meandering answer, but they're kind of like, hopefully there's some bits in there that will be really useful for people to go explore it today, because that's what you should be doing. Definitely start today and you'll be fine.
Yeah, it makes me think about how one of the questions or one of the things that comes up as we go through the podcast and I hear people is how much, at least in my case too, is how much knowing about tech, even the basics, has helped me in my career and in my day-to-day conversations. And it's just been massively amazing. I mean, yeah, I work in tech, sure, but like still in the sense that we're using it so much now that even getting educated on it in general is gonna be such a big help. You're never wasting time by learning something, even if it's not something that you end up pursuing as, like, let's say your specialty. Knowing, kind of starting to play around with all of the areas until you find where you want to go is part of the process, right? So that's those are all really good points. What about you, Greg?
Yes, it's a really interesting one. I would definitely echo what Robin said in terms of finding what it is you're passionate about or interested in, and maybe starting with things you see that feel quite inspirational, or areas you think, I would love to be part of that particular space or do what those people do, whatever it might be. I guess the process is, how do you find that? If you know, how do you start to get move in that direction? And so I think looking for things to read, starting to kind of generally take an interest in the space as much as you can. There's so much out there now that makes a lot of tech quite accessible in terms of people writing about things, newsletters, whatever it might be. I think starting to immerse yourself in that space is really valuable. But the other thing I was also reflecting on as Robin was talking is, when I was younger, the tech world didn't really exist as we understand it today, if you know what I mean. Like, obviously it was there, but it was very, very different from how you'd understand it now. But I was always working with technology, and lots of the stuff I used to work with is kind of obsolete now, or you know, is like you just wouldn't use it in the same way because the landscape shifted. And so I think one thing that's really important is to be adaptable, or learn how to be adaptable. And one thing I really took from being at art school was learning about a way to see the world or approach the world, or to kind of look for things that have meaning to you or stand out to you. And also, and then since art school and working with technology, and my way of navigating through it is to learn that actually it's more about the approach rather than the specific technologies that you're looking at. And so I would really say, you know, you need to start somewhere. I would say to kind of really start to immerse yourself in the space, and once you find that direction, just kind of work towards it and be prepared for the fact that it moves so quickly, and you just need to constantly update your knowledge, your thinking. And so I think being in the space where if you find what you enjoy, you'll actually enjoy that process, and you'll learn a lot as you go along, and then you'll be able to look back and see, I guess, how tech's evolved. It's always kind of moving in a particular direction, but it's just understanding that, yeah, you need to be able to adapt and change as technology does.
Yeah, I think that's a vital point to make, is that it doesn't stand still. And I think we all have had to accept that, where things that we've learned, we thought, brilliant, we can use that in the project, and then you realize that you can't. But as soon as you recognize it's there, then that just comes another part and parcel. And it's a great skill if you can accept it in learning everything about tech. It's a great skill when it comes to working in business. Things change and you have to adapt. Like that is definitely a life lesson. because if you can bring that adaptability to your learning about technology, then you become more open-minded about the world around us, because it does move quickly. We know that we have to stand up and tell people about it, but it makes it exciting, and it's not there is certainly no boredom there, because there is always someone with an opinion that you either agree with or you disagree with, but it is part of the world we live in today, that is just going to keep on moving. And if you can embrace that, you know it exists, then that in itself is a really great step forward, because you've already accepted that, you know, that things won't stay the same and the status quo won't be there in a year's time.
But I do think, like, try everything out as well. So I think your point earlier, Robin, about you might realize you really dislike the process of coding or whatever, and I think that's fine. That's a really valuable thing to learn, and it's something I always, when I teach at the university, is often like showing, like putting the students through working with code, and actually if someone really hate their process, it's really valuable to learn that. But then also with a bit of understanding, it means you can still work with code, but maybe not directly. You might be working with people that are coding, but having a bit of the understanding about how it works enables you to then have a, you know, better conversation and to kind of really sort of move it forward. So I think try things out, be curious, and just be prepared to not enjoy certain parts, but then through that, I think you'll then find the bit that you do really like.
Yeah, you get into you finally find your flow. I think that's like in any part of your life. But I mean, again, it reminds me of me, what you were just saying, Greg, where, you know, I learned through doing that I don't like the actual physical act of coding, but what I do like is learning the jargon of coding, understanding what coding is and why it's important, and understanding then how to talk to my engineers and developers at work or outside of work, or even doing this podcast and speaking to people like that who then I can bring out and extract their knowledge because I understand that. So again, you don't have to, we think tech is one specific thing, but it can be anything you kind of make of it. I mean, I truly created my own role and my own like life around tech by myself. Like it was something I decided I wanted to do, which is teach and talk and explain rather than actually do it. And here I am in tech, which works, you know. So all really good things. Well, I have a last question, which is like kind of completely unrelated to tech, but I really want to know. And it's kind of like what I ask at the end. But what makes each of you your happiest you? Like, what makes you just so happy, whether or not it's in tech, but what's that thing that you love to do or be in this world? Why don't we go with Greg, because you're smiling right now. And Robin looks like he's like, I don't know, nothing makes me happy. No,
Ah, good question. What makes me most happy? I think it's that moment of, I don't know, the first thing I jumped to was good food and good travel, and like yeah, it makes me think of like one of the things I really enjoyed about some of the experiences we went through, for example, was being able to go to different locations in the world. And I think meeting people in different places, seeing different cultures, being able to kind of connect those things up. There's moments where, for me, it's usually around food, but if I'm sat there eating some amazing food in a location I've not been to, and you have that moment, everything aligns, and that's moments when I'm most happy, when I'm in a new place, eating new food with new people. Yeah, I think that's it.
I love that. I learned all about Greg and his eating habits and during our journey, and learned a lot about food along the way. So it's very true. And again, it goes back to the beauty. I mean, I thought when I used to think about my dream job, I used to think of traveling as like, oh, I just want to travel. I don't care what it is. And tech got me that dream job, like that dream life of traveling and meeting new people in different cultures and teaching technology, which I never thought would be possible. So it's a really good point, and I definitely can say that for me, when we did that trip, that was some of the happiest moments of my life, and never laughed so much in just 3 weeks of that. But and to think that, we're traveling a lot and we're kind of like going through different time zones and doing a lot of things at once. It was amazing how much fun I had and eating the great food, like you said, Rob. Right, yeah, definitely understand that one. But that's awesome. What about you, Robin?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely echo. We've been very lucky to travel to many countries and ultimately getting to do what we love, and we do it with people. Like there's a group of us who Greg alluded to, that we share information with, and it's because when you're up in front of people talking to them, talking to attendees about, or people come on your sessions about tech, you've got to trust each other, and you find there's that bond around you talking about something you're passionate about, and you get to do cool stuff like travel to really interesting countries. In terms of what's interesting, as Greg was talking, I was thinking about like what makes me happy. Well, the learning thing is kind of really interesting, because I think I mentioned that the idea of keeping like learning. I have this kind of vision that when I get to some form of aged retirement age, and I won't have learned everything I want to learn around tech and design, actually design and the creative side. So pushing those boundaries have always been, well, have come to the fore recently, where I really want to push the level of creativity, whether it's using tech and digital, or whether it's using like skills I'm learning outside, away from kind of computers and everything that's associated with them. And the area that I get a lot of satisfaction out of is gardening and the outside world, because you've got to learn a ton of stuff about plants and trees and growing grass, like all the things that you do. And I have huge amount of respect for people who've got that knowledge and got that expertise, because from the technical side, we can hammer code day in, day out until we make it work. And if we have to, we can get someone in to do it for us. Whereas with gardening, you've got to do stuff, you've got to put it out there, and you've got to let nature do its thing. And if it fails, it fails, and it often does fail. You get another turn a year later when the season comes around again. And I really like that secular approach to learning and understanding the world around us. And it's a real juxtaposition for understanding how a computer works versus how to grow stuff, when there's no rhyme or reason. And I suppose there is a Stack Overflow for gardeners, but there isn't that approach of going, why isn't my code working? Or why isn't this plant growing this particular point? And maybe I'm just turning into one of those 40-year-olds with gardens and golfs, but it's like, I really like that fact that when you take a step away from the computer, and it's advocate for that, certainly, and you get outside and you try and do things, you've got to apply some of that approach that you had learning to code with learning to garden, or whatever it is, irrespective of the fact they're very, very different. And when you get it right, and it's a beautiful day and it's hot and sunny, and you get to kind of enjoy the space you've created, then I think that's definitely, where I'm happiest. And it's probably home. I have 2 daughters and my wife, like those summer days, which you are very different to sort of the days where you're hammering away at a computer trying to get something to work. But it's an interesting question, because you kind of are trying to work out, like, what is there a right answer to that? I don't know. But
There's no right answer at all. That's why I love the question, because it, like, Robin has the deep learning, and then Greg is like, I like eating. But at the same time, like, it's great because it weaves everything together, because we talked about all of these things in tech, and then, Greg kind of alluded more towards like the cultures and being able to move around and eat good food with good people and travel and teach what you love. And then Robin, everything you said about gardening, I have plants, and I recently picked them up a year ago, and it's literally the exact same thing. There's a Stack Overflow for gardeners, where you can learn from each other. There's the process of being frustrated, of learning, of having to build this, but then you see the plant growing, and like it's rewarding, and then you want to come back for more, and you really build that relationship with that plant or the gardening and everything. And again, it just continues to reiterate how passionate I am about this type of a podcast, which just says that life is kind of all interconnected, and you can learn from every area of your life and bring it to the next part of your phase or the career that you're doing and everything. And just like gardening would, and accepting that nature is nature, and sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not. It's the same thing as anything like tech and things like that as well. So I love the answers. I really thought, no, I was not expecting Greg. Maybe I was expecting the food one, but I love bringing the gardening into it,
This
and
is all I talk
everything.
about. Yeah.
It's like sitting on the sofa in his office and eating. It's
I
brilliant.
was gonna say it's either food or sitting in the sofa or seeing the sun. So we could see Greg is very efficient as a human, which is great.
There we go.
Oh my gosh. Well, you two, it's just an honor, truly, and a pleasure to have both of you here. And it makes me so happy. I mean, when I think of what makes me happiest, it's literally standing in front of the two of you and talking about this. Truly makes my day, and it's going to carry on for the rest of the day. So, just another reminder of continuing to follow what you love to do, because it brings you to these types of environments. And thank you both so much for taking time. I know we all are so busy, and the fact that you're here just means literally the world to me. And I hope that you can feel it from my heart to yours. We'll see you later.
Thanks, Carol.
Been a pleasure.